I never imagined the day I would feel betrayed by both the people I loved most. My boyfriend and my sister would come in such a quiet, ordinary way. It started with a text I found on Ethan's phone while I was waiting for him to finish his shower. A message from Megan, my sister, and the words cut through me sharper than any blade. I had a great time last night. My heart froze. My hands shook, my chest tightened, and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't even breathe. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Every scenario running through my mind, each more devastating than the last. The betrayal was immediate, raw, and incomprehensible. The people I had trusted implicitly had just shattered the foundation of my life. I backed away from the phone, my mind reeling. Ethan, my boyfriend for 3 years, had been someone I believed loved me, someone who had promised commitment and loyalty. Megan, my sister, had been my best friend for as long as I could remember, the person who had seen me through heartbreaks, late-night panic attacks, and life-changing decisions. And yet, in one simple, intimate act, they had both betrayed me, showing a side I had never imagined existed. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief that made my stomach twist painfully. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to make them feel the weight of what they had done, but all I could do was stand there, paralyzed, feeling the world collapse around me. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in as if they too were judging me, trapping me in my own heartbreak. I remembered the quiet evenings I had spent planning a future with Ethan, imagining the trips, the laughter, the love I believed was unshakable. I thought of the secrets I had shared with Megan, our whispered late-night conversations, the trust I had placed in her, thinking she would always have my back. And now all of it felt like a lie. The sting of humiliation was immediate. I imagined them laughing somewhere, pretending nothing had happened, as though I were invisible, irrelevant, and easily replaceable. Yet, amidst the shock and hurt, a strange sense of clarity began to emerge. I realized that Ethan had never truly respected me, and Megan had never truly valued me as a sister. Their betrayal, as painful and gut-wrenching as it was, revealed the truth I had been avoiding. I had been blinded by love and loyalty to people who didn't deserve it. A flicker of relief stirred deep within me, though it was buried under layers of anger and sorrow. For the first time in years, I understood that the people who hurt us the most often show us exactly who they are, and that knowledge, though painful, was strangely liberating. I spent the rest of the night pacing my apartment, trying to process what I had discovered. The air felt heavy with tension, the hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds pressing against the quiet chaos in my mind. I thought about how long Ethan and Megan had been hiding their secret, what small lies and omissions had built up to this moment. Each memory that once seemed harmless, a missed call, a vague excuse, a casual dismissal, now carried the weight of betrayal. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and disbelief, and yet I couldn't deny the sense of freedom creeping through the cracks of my heartbreak. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to step back from both of them, to reclaim the control over my life that they had tried to steal. I didn't know yet what that meant for the future of my relationship with Ethan, or even with Megan, but I knew one thing. Clearly, I deserved better than deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. The anger still burned in my chest, raw and hot, but it was tempered by a strange, quiet sense of empowerment. Their choices had exposed the toxicity I had been ignoring, and now I could act with clarity, without fear of their judgment or manipulation. Even as I went through my morning routine, I felt a shift in the way I moved through the apartment, a subtle but powerful assertion of independence. The betrayal that had initially crushed me now seemed like an opening, a path to reclaim my dignity, my self-respect, and my peace of mind. And deep down, buried beneath all the pain, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't devastated. I was ready. The days following my discovery were a blur of emotion, a storm that seemed to ripple through every corner of my life. Every message notification made my heart race with dread. Every phone call from Ethan, a potential reminder of the betrayal I was trying so desperately to process. I noticed the subtle ways he tried to regain control: texts, apologizing vaguely, offers to talk things out, even casual comments meant to downplay the seriousness of his actions. But I was no longer a passive participant in this dynamic. Each attempt at manipulation or minimization made my resolve grow stronger. I realized that I could not and would not allow him to dictate the narrative of my life any longer. Megan, on the other hand, remained disturbingly nonchalant. When I confronted her over the phone, her laughter, thin and sharp, made something inside me crack. She claimed it had been a one-time thing and insisted that I was overreacting for being upset. The betrayal stung deeper than Ethan's because it was familial, intimate, and somehow more personal. Megan had been my confidant, my sister in every sense of the word. And yet she had crossed a line that could not be erased, with half-hearted apologies or excuses. Anger and hurt warred inside me with a strange, growing sense of relief that I finally knew who my real allies were, and who had been hiding their true nature all along. Every encounter with either of them became a minefield of tension. At first, I tried to maintain civility, speaking carefully and avoiding triggers. But it was impossible to ignore the underlying toxicity. Ethan's smug expressions, Megan's careless jokes, even their shared glances that once made my stomach twist with fear, they all served as reminders of the deception I had endured. And yet, in the midst of this emotional chaos, I began to notice something remarkable, a newfound clarity. The betrayal had stripped away illusions, leaving me face to face with reality. I could see now that my energy, my love, and my trust had been invested in people who didn't deserve them. And the realization, though painful, was empowering. Friends quickly picked up on the tension, offering support and encouragement that I hadn't realized I needed. Late-night phone calls with my best friend Jenna became lifelines. "You don't need them, Laura," she said repeatedly, her voice fierce and comforting. "You're better off without them dragging you down." Those words sank into me slowly, reshaping the way I viewed the betrayal. I realized that what initially felt like the end of everything was actually the beginning of something I had never allowed myself before: freedom. I could focus on myself, my goals, and the people who truly valued me. Yet the emotional wounds were still raw. Sleep came reluctantly, haunted by images of them together, of laughter and intimacy that had been stolen from me. My heart ached not just from lost love, but from the realization that family and romantic trust could be so easily broken. At times I questioned whether my relief was wrong, whether I should feel hurt rather than secretly grateful for the truth. But as the days passed, I began to see that this clarity, this painful awareness, was a gift. I was free to rebuild my life without the constraints of toxic relationships. And the relief I felt wasn't callous, it was survival. By the end of the week, I had made a conscious decision. I would no longer be emotionally available to either Ethan or Megan until they demonstrated genuine remorse or change, which I realized with a mix of sadness and satisfaction might never happen. The anger that burned in me had shifted. It was no longer purely reactive, but strategic. I had begun to reclaim control over my emotions, over my environment, and over the narrative of my life. Their betrayal, as devastating as it had been, was also a liberation, a forced awakening that allowed me to see them for who they truly were. And so I moved forward, cautiously but deliberately. Each day, a reclamation of myself. The initial shock of betrayal had given way to an unexpected clarity, a quiet, simmering strength that I hadn't known I possessed. I understood now that this wasn't just heartbreak, it was the beginning of a transformation, one that would ultimately allow me to thrive without the weight of deception or manipulation hanging over me. The worst had happened, and yet, paradoxically, I felt ready. Ready to rebuild, ready to reclaim, and ready to embrace the freedom their betrayal had unexpectedly gifted me. It wasn't until a week later that I stumbled upon the full extent of Ethan and Megan's deception. And the discovery was like a sudden gust of wind, ripping away the last veil of confusion. While clearing out Ethan's apartment after he insisted on returning my things, I found a stack of receipts and hotel keycards tucked into the corner of a drawer. At first, my stomach sank, the familiar mix of anger and heartbreak threatening to swallow me whole. But as I sorted through them, I began to notice a pattern. Ethan hadn't just cheated with Megan, he had been unfaithful multiple times, lying, manipulating, and weaving a web of dishonesty that spanned months, maybe even years. My initial devastation was quickly replaced with a strange, vindicating clarity. The betrayal was bigger than I had imagined, and in truth, I had narrowly avoided a far deeper heartbreak. Megan's part in the story also revealed itself in a new, disturbing light. Hidden text messages, photos, and social media tags illustrated a side of her that I had suspected but never wanted to fully see. Her manipulations weren't limited to Ethan, they extended to friends, family, and even professional situations, showing a pattern of selfishness and opportunism I hadn't recognized before. I sat on the edge of the couch, heart pounding, as the weight of their deceit settled around me like a thick fog. And yet, amidst the anger and humiliation, I felt a surprising sense of relief. The betrayal had shown me the truth. I was free from toxic influences, free from people who had never truly valued or respected me. I replayed every memory in my head, trying to reconcile the woman I thought Megan was with the reality I had uncovered. It hurt, but there was no confusion now. No lingering maybe or I had clarity, and clarity carried its own quiet power. I thought about all the nights I had spent worrying about Ethan's loyalty or Megan's motives, wondering if I was overreacting or misjudging situations. Now, every doubt, every hesitation seemed absurd. Their actions had spoken louder than any denial, and the truth was undeniable. They had shown me exactly who they were, and in that revelation, I found a kind of liberation that I hadn't expected. The more I examined the evidence, the more I realized how fortunate I was to have discovered the betrayal when I did. I could see, in sharp contrast, how their relationships with each other were unstable, filled with lies and manipulation. Ethan's attempts to charm and deflect, Megan's calculated flattery and excuses, it all revealed a fragile foundation built on deceit, a house of cards that could collapse at any moment. I felt a flicker of satisfaction at the thought of them navigating the consequences of their own choices. The karmic balance subtly aligning even without my intervention. The irony wasn't lost on me. The betrayal that had once devastated me was now a shield, protecting me from deeper pain and hardship. As I sat alone that night, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, I began to envision my own path forward. The anger and humiliation had softened into determination and resolve. I realized that my life was mine to reclaim, my energy mine to direct, and my self-worth mine to affirm. I could no longer allow either Ethan or Megan to occupy space in my heart or dictate my emotions. The betrayal had stripped away illusions and left me with a rare gift, the opportunity to rebuild without compromise, to focus entirely on myself, and to embrace a life free from toxic entanglements. By the end of the week, I had started making plans, practical steps to distance myself from both of them, reclaim personal possessions, and rebuild emotional boundaries. Every decision, every action reinforced the same truth. Their betrayal, as painful as it had been, was the catalyst I needed to reclaim autonomy over my life. I was beginning to see the silver lining, a strange and powerful gratitude for the clarity their actions had forced upon me. In losing their trust, I had gained insight. In their deception, I had found freedom. And in their selfishness, I had discovered my own strength. For the first time in months, I felt a quiet, simmering hope. The worst had happened, yet paradoxically, it had set me on a path towards something better, something I had never imagined would be possible while trapped in the shadows of their lies. That was the moment everything changed. I knew that the coming confrontation would not just be about anger or justice, it would be about reclaiming my life, affirming my worth, and finally stepping into a future that I controlled entirely. The confrontation was inevitable, and by the time I arranged to meet Megan and Ethan, I felt a strange mixture of anger, anticipation, and empowerment. I had spent days rehearsing in my mind how I would speak, what I would say, and how I would maintain control over the situation. This wasn't about pleading or demanding apologies anymore. It was about asserting my truth and making them face the consequences of their choices. I arrived at Megan's apartment first, the autumn air crisp against my skin, and as I waited, I felt a surge of clarity. Their betrayal had shown me exactly who they were, and now it was time for them to see who I had become. When Ethan arrived, his confident smirk faltered the moment our eyes met. He tried to cover it with a casual greeting, but I saw the tension behind his words, the subtle shift in his posture that betrayed fear. Megan, sitting beside him, laughed lightly, as though to mask her own discomfort, but the sound felt hollow and brittle. I laid the stack of evidence I had gathered across the coffee table, each receipt, message, and photograph, a hammer striking against their facade. "Do you see this?" I asked, voice calm but sharp, each word deliberate. "This is your truth. Not mine, not a misunderstanding, not a mistake. This is exactly what you've done, and I want you to acknowledge it." Megan's face turned pale, and Ethan's jaw tightened. They both opened their mouths, trying to explain, deflect, or minimize. But I cut them off with a steady hand and a gaze that refused to waver. "No, I've heard all your excuses before. I've seen your patterns. You've been dishonest, manipulative, and cruel not just to me, but to anyone foolish enough to trust you." The room felt electric with tension, the air heavy as if holding its breath along with me. I could feel their panic, their discomfort growing, and it gave me an unexpected sense of satisfaction, not from revenge, but from the sheer recognition of my own strength. I spoke next about Megan's betrayal, the personal wound that had cut deeper because of blood and trust. "I can't understand how you could do this to your own sister," I said, my voice steady but lined with hurt. "I trusted you. I confided in you, and you both of you chose deceit over loyalty, betrayal over love. Megan's hands trembled slightly, her eyes darting between Ethan and me, trying to find a way to regain control. But I held her gaze, unwavering. This isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It's about accountability, and you need to see that your choices have consequences. As I continued, I noticed a subtle shift. The bravado that had once defined Ethan and Megan's demeanor crumbled further under the weight of truth. Their attempts to rationalize, charm, or deflect fell flat, leaving only discomfort, guilt, and the undeniable reality of their actions. I could feel the tension crackling in the room, each pause between words thick with the unsaid acknowledgement that they had been found out, exposed, and defeated not by confrontation alone, but by the clarity, composure, and confidence I brought into the space. By the time I finished speaking, I felt a profound sense of release. My voice, steady and firm, had carried years of hurt, doubt, and fear, and in speaking my truth, I reclaimed not just my dignity but my power. Ethan and Megan sat in stunned silence, the reality of their choices reflected back at them in my unwavering gaze. I realized in that moment that the confrontation wasn't about anger or vengeance, it was about assertion, about making them witness the consequences of their actions, and about affirming to myself that I would no longer tolerate deceit or betrayal in my life. Walking out of that apartment, the autumn breeze brushing against my face, I felt lighter than I had in months. The confrontation had achieved what I needed: clarity, closure, and empowerment. I knew the path forward wouldn't be free of challenges or reflection, but I also knew that I had taken the first step in reclaiming control over my life. For the first time since discovering their betrayal, I felt a sense of liberation, one that promised a future defined not by their deceit, but by my strength, independence, and resilience. The days after the confrontation brought a quiet, almost surreal sense of liberation. Megan and Ethan avoided me, their texts and calls sparse and awkward, the bravado and casual manipulation of the past replaced by discomfort and silence. For the first time in months, I felt the freedom of space and distance, a clarity that no apology or excuse could ever provide. Their absence was a balm, and with it came a surprising, almost guilty sense of gratitude. The betrayal that had once felt like the end of my world had, paradoxically, become the beginning of my reclamation. I began to notice the small, almost poetic ways life seemed to validate my newfound freedom. Ethan's attempts to charm other women soon backfired. Friends who had once warned me about his manipulative tendencies now quietly informed me that he was facing consequences in his social circle. Megan, meanwhile, began to struggle with her own circle of friends and colleagues who had learned of her manipulative and self-serving behavior. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not from revenge, but from witnessing the natural consequences of their choices unfold. Karma, I realized, wasn't something I needed to orchestrate. It simply followed actions, and theirs had spoken volumes. In the space they left behind, I started to rebuild myself. I threw myself into hobbies, passions, and projects I had neglected while caught in the web of betrayal and manipulation. Long walks, journaling, late-night calls with supportive friends all became acts of reclamation. Each day, I grew stronger, more confident, and increasingly aware of the power I held over my own life. The anger and hurt that had once consumed me became fuel, propelling me forward rather than holding me back. For the first time in years, I felt untethered, free from the weight of their deceit and ready to embrace life on my terms. One evening, as I sat on the balcony watching the sunset, I reflected on the unexpected gift the betrayal had given me. I thought about the countless nights I had spent crying, questioning myself, wondering why they had done this to me. And suddenly, it all made sense. Their betrayal had been a catalyst, a painful but necessary wake-up call that forced me to see who I truly was and who I deserved to be around. The freedom, the empowerment, and the clarity I now felt could never have been achieved without that sharp, bitter sting of deception. I smiled softly, realizing that I was no longer a victim, no longer defined by their actions, but by my response, my resilience, and my strength. Weeks turned into months, and life began to feel lighter, brighter, and unshackled. I met new people who respected and valued me. Friendships blossomed, and I even allowed myself to consider romantic possibilities again, but this time with caution, discernment, and confidence. I felt no desire to return to Ethan or Megan. Their chapter was closed. Their betrayal, which had once seemed like a wound impossible to heal, had become the defining moment of transformation in my life. I had learned to trust my instincts, value my worth, and refused to let anyone diminish my potential. In quiet moments, I sometimes imagined Ethan and Megan facing the ripple effects of their own actions, awkward encounters, lost trust, and shattered reputations. I felt no gloating pleasure, only the calm recognition that life had a way of balancing itself, and that I was no longer entangled in their chaos. My sister, once a source of comfort and companionship, had revealed her true colors, and I was better off for it. My boyfriend, once the center of my emotional world, had been exposed for who he truly was. Their absence was a gift disguised as pain, and I finally understood that the worst betrayal could also become the greatest liberation. As I looked forward, I realized that the story of Ethan and Megan no longer held any power over me. I had reclaimed my narrative, my peace, and my self-worth. The betrayal that had once devastated me had ultimately set me free, teaching me lessons in resilience, clarity, and empowerment that I would carry for the rest of my life. And in that moment, standing on the balcony with the city lights twinkling below, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I was alive, I was whole, and I was finally free. I'm glad they betrayed me,